Welcome, anyone. Well, no one's listening yet. Welcome to the live stream. Welcome to live stream number 2. So, does everyone want to introduce themselves again? I think it's a subset of the people that were on last time, but I'm Jason. I'm sci-fi on superversivesf.com. I should introduce people, shouldn't I? Because nobody knows, because I can't just point at people. So, yeah, David.
Yes.
Introduce yourself, please.
I'm David Hallquist. I've done a few pieces with Sci-Fi Journal and contributor on Superversive.com.
Great. Brian?
Yes, hello, I'm Brian Niemeyer. I'm also a Sci-Fi Journal contributor and Superversive SF contributor, and general pack schlock sci-fi fantasy writer.
Nice. Ben?
Ben Zwitzky, also Sci-Fi Journal contributor and Superversive SF contributor. I write the serial Beyond the Mist for the Sci-Fi Journal.
I think
okay.
I'm what's left.
Yeah, that leaves you, EJ.
Okay, that's I'm EJ Shumack. I put out a couple of novels about 20 years ago. Fantasy novels, the Iron Dragon series, with someone else, and got out of it. And then recently, this last year, got back into it and got involved with Jason and put a couple pieces in Jason's magazine and in a few other magazines, and with Superversive, and starting to enjoy myself again.
Good. That's good. I'm glad I can be a part of that.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So, the question for today is, what makes a good story? And, you know, I'm going to be taking notes because I keep buying them, so I should figure this question out.
Well, be careful, Jason, because you're doing a good job so far. Don't mess yourself up.
Yeah, people keep saying that, and I'm just thinking, I just buy the stories I like. There's nothing to it. I read. If I get to the end of the story, I usually buy it.
Well, there's your answer. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
That probably sounds really harsh, but I put at least when it comes to buying stories for Superversive SF. Well, I've employed first readers now. So they're getting a first look, and it's getting a bit more formalized. But at least when I started, I just put headphones on, got on the train, and started trying to read stories. And if I didn't get to the end of it, then it didn't grab me enough. So it went in the it didn't grab me pile. And I'd usually give them a second. I'd try and give them a second read. Hey, Josh.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hello.
We can
hear you just fine.
Okay, there we go. Hey, guys.
Good afternoon.
Josh, do you want to introduce yourself quickly? We just started chatting.
Yeah, sure. I'm Joshua Young. I've contributed 2 stories to the Sci-Fi Journal now, Domo and God Eaters, and have a novel coming out sometime later this year from Castalia House, Buddha's Dream of Enlightened Sheep.
I'm looking forward to that.
Nice.
I'm looking forward to being done with the stupid thing.
Finally ready.
Full-size novel?
It's short, but yeah, full size.
All right.
Nice. I'm looking
Admire
forward to
your
reading
fortitude.
Well, I'm glad people are looking forward to it. Besides Mom.
Okay.
Outstanding.
This is a good intro to where we're going, which is what makes a great story.
What makes what makes a great story? If I get to the end of them, I like them. So, you know. And then there's a couple of other filters like, can I print this? Because I've got a couple that I liked, but it was just like, I can't run softcore pornography in my magazine. They're not quite that bad, but you know, it was just like, I want to be family friendly. I can't run this. It's well written, but I can't run it. And you know, and does it fit? There's a couple of stories that just don't fit.
I was
Yeah.
at how many people want to push that on other people even. For example, in my writers group, I'm constantly being told by one particular gentleman that my alien cats need to have sex. And
Okay.
I don't think I'm ready for that.
Well, if they want to continue the species and we want there to be more alien cats, then it's technically true.
That's true, or we'll lose a species.
But whether we
I
have to be
suppose.
made a party to it is another question.
What's
I
up?
was going to say that could all happen off screen. So, well, off.
Between
Hey,
asterisks.
I don't know. Something like that. Yeah.
That's usually my strategy is fading to black.
Right. Actually, one thing that's interesting, because we'd mentioned the Sci-Fi Journal, which kind of is the airship that started all of this. One thing that I think all of the Sci-Fi Journal stories have, and probably the genesis, at least the two that I've put in, is the idea. What is the concept that is the genesis that leads to all of it? What is the either new idea or new take on an idea, the concept, point of view, or way of describing something that's new? There's always something in there, like all of them, the ones I love and the ones I like, and all of it. There's been something in the journals that has where I've gone kind of like, wow, that isn't something that I've seen before.
Yeah, and one of the areas where I have an advantage is usually when people tack religion onto a story, they do it very poorly or very aggressively and hostile. And being an MDiv student that loves science fiction, I have a slightly different perspective on it than most of those folks.
Oh, really? So we are both theologians. There are two theologians in this discussion.
We are. I'm a baby theologian yet, but that's me.
Well, you'll get there. Just spend enough time, do enough reading. They'll give enough money. They'll hand you a sheepskin. And then then you go to the black hole, sir, because it never ends. But yeah, I fully agree. I fully agree with your statement.
And it's weird, but one of the ways I learned to write religion was through watching anime, because they plunder Christianity left and right for their stuff, and so they don't do it like they're not trying to preach, and so I managed to sort of synthesize the anime technique with my theological worldview, and I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on how to go about it. But
well, based on your stories, I'd agree.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I was going to say you do. Sorry, I had to mute out for a second there. I had puppies charging in. That's okay.
Are they
It's
sad?
all good.
Hope they're not
My
rabid.
puppies aren't sad. No, my puppies aren't sad already.
I
They're
know
a little
rabbits
sad.
don't-
They're a little sad at the moment because they're looking at me like, well, you're awake, so that means it's breakfast time.
I give them something to read.
Something to read. Yes, they eat books. Anyway, I actually, yeah, I think Josh does really good religion in his stories. I think it's, well, I don't know, I bought two of them, so. So you were saying anime plunders sort of the Christian canon. Do you have an example of that?
Yeah. Neon Genesis Evangelion's a pretty.
I have a
Bingo.
I should say up front, the sum total of anime I've watched. I grew up watching Robotech and I liked it, but that was about it. And I saw Akira once.
There's a lot of very good science fiction in anime, but right off the
I've
top
heard
of
that.
my
I
head.
just don't really get it. So.
Well, if you like
I don't know,
Robotech,
it just
we'll talk
doesn't-
about
it just-
Macross.
It doesn't. I've tried other ones. I got friends that love it. It's just I've never really gotten into it all that well beyond Macross. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you want to look at a bit more obnoxious, in that same vein would be Bible Black.
I haven't actually seen that one.
It's basically a softcore porn. It's,
Hey, Peter's here. Hey, Peter.
Hello.
Hey, Peter.
Hello. Introductions?
If you don't,
Yes, please, Peter, introduce yourself. When he gets here.
Okay, let him get situated. But while he's doing that, yeah, Jason, if you liked Robotech, I would recommend for something a bit more serious, any Gundam series set in the Universal Century setting. It's
Okay.
basically like MASH in space.
Oh,
I
okay.
think Evangelion is probably the most blatant, at least with the wording and what's going on.
You probably want to turn
Hit that one right on the head.
the camera off.
Yeah, Peter, turn the camera off to save bandwidth.
But yes, while they're working out the technical difficulties, just to address Eva. Yeah, Eva does have Christianity in it, although through the lens of Gnosticism, it's extremely Gnostic.
Yeah, that and Xenogears and Xenosaga as well both plunder that Gnostic Christianity, Neoplatonism, and
yeah, don't get me started on that. But yeah,
I love Xenogears, but Xenosaga, eh.
well, they're preaching to the choir. But yeah, the best description of the Japanese plundering of Christianity that I've heard was from a Sailor Moon fanfic where a character says, "Hurry, let's get down to the mall because they've got Santa Claus crucified up on a cross down there, and we need to get down there before they straighten out their Christian theology or ideology."
Okay.
Oh dear. I've heard it's actually like that in Japan. I've never been, but
Well, the thing
Yeah,
about Japan is, yeah, go ahead.
It'd be fascinating to see something that's familiar reflected from an unfamiliar vantage point. And I think that's kind of one of those things. That's an example probably of that. Like you also see it sometimes where you'll see how familiar elements of Western civilization seem somewhat strange when they're depicted in a foreign film or something like that too. It's interesting.
Right, only the Japanese more so because they're basically starting from a blank slate. It's almost impossible for a Westerner to have any idea just how big a social, cultural, and philosophical impact it was after World War II, when MacArthur dictated that the emperor renounce his divinity, renounce all those theological claims. It would be as if a conquering army forced not only the heads of the Western country where you gentlemen live, because we're from around the globe here, but also, forced Pope Francis and other prominent theologians, Archbishop of Canterbury, to deny Christ, deny that Scripture was real or infallible. I mean, just even back to denying that the scholastics and the classic philosophers were valid. So they pretty much had the entire philosophical and theological rug ripped out from under them. They've had to rebuild.
I didn't know they'd taken out Shinto entirely. I thought they just released the control over it. There was no longer any state banking or control over it.
State, as I understand it, though, state Shinto had been worked in pretty aggressively into the religious and cultural backgrounds, and so it was the war they were fighting in World War II was essentially a holy war to them at that point. So,
right, hence the kamikaze phenomenon.
Yeah, certainly Shinto hasn't disappeared in Japan.
Right.
Or the government visiting Shinto shrines to honor the war dead, etc.
Right, it hasn't, but it's not. It's nowhere near close to the majority or even plurality religion. I mean, really practical.
It's certainly not controlling, and it was controlling before, absolutely.
Right. Well, the point is, the average Japanese person, by far, the majority of the country are practical agnostics, if not atheists, at least in their approach to life.
Yeah, I had a professor that said, I think there's a saying that you're born Shinto and die Buddhist in Japan, and between the two of them, you just kind of go do whatever.
Right, and that results in, like you said, I think that's where that fascinating mirror, where we see Western culture reflected from a culture that really is kind of experiencing it afresh, comes from.
Yeah,
Right.
sort of like ex, so doing it as something as like a different world to explore rather than just an idea that we are familiar with.
Right.
Who was that?
Don't know. I wonder if that's something that could also be used as a device. I've seen a few science fiction authors essentially use the idea of viewing our culture from an alien perspective in the same way we would view an alien culture from our perspective. The most famous one I can think of is probably Heinlein's Stranger in the Strange Land, which has other issues with it that, I may and others here may not agree with, but he captured, I think, that well with Valentine looking with alien eyes
Oh, that's
at
brilliant.
the culture of his.
Yeah. But getting us back around to the original topic, I think this relates because what Josh initially described was how heavy-handed a lot of writers who include religion tend to tack it on, how heavy-handed it is. And that brings us back to the dread specter of message fic. So we're talking about what makes a good story is just blatant message fiction where the message comes first in the story. It's perhaps an afterthought. Can that be good fiction, or is that the definition of a bad story?
I don't know. Whenever someone says message fiction and never makes a good story, I'm always left going, I read Starship Troopers. It was pretty. I love Starship Troopers, but it's got a pretty unsubtle message. So
It can work if it's a good story. If you've got good characters, if you've got good story, you got a new idea, if you've all the things that make a good story in the message fiction, and you don't let them, and the author doesn't have the message trample the story into the dirt, trying to trample into your brain, I think it can be good. It can even be good if it's a message that you don't necessarily agree with. It can still be an entertaining story.
okay. Well, actually, hang on. I have a question. Actually, first up, hey Peter, can we hear you? You appear to be muted at the moment. I'm not sure what's going on there.
We can see the back of his computer, though. So.
Okay, now he's. Speak up, Pete.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you
Yes.
Yes, there you were.
I think.
We can also see you, though. Well, we can see some wires.
There we go. Ooh, live.
Look for the switch camera off button.
Right at the top, in the middle of the Hangout screen, at least the one I'm on, there's a big red, it looks like a little camera, and I don't think it'll be red because yours is on, but you should be able to just turn that off.
There you go.
There we go. Saves us some bandwidth. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself? And also, I've never actually heard your voice before.
You just switch your mic on.
He doesn't want you to hear his voice.
How's with the hearing problem?
I am having technical problems. Can you hear this? Because I have
Yes.
Can hear you fine.
Hello,
Yes.
everyone. I am
Peter.
calling in from Fresno, California, where it's 12:24. I had added 3 hours onto the 3 p.m. Eastern time for some reason. I thought this is great. I get to go home. I get to go home and just hang out and do this at a nice, convenient time. But no.
Okay, I did that last time.
That was interesting about last night. I was at my Aquinas group, and instead of reading Aquinas, we sat around and just BS, and the issue came up about the Japanese emperor being forced to renounce his divinity as a term of the Article of Surrender.
Signal
and I had
grace.
not heard that.
That's a signal grace right there. Synchronicity.
Yes. There are no coincidences. So was that a term of the Article of Surrender that he did that?
It was, yeah.
Okay. And I speculated the reason was as an anti-militarism move. The idea that being that somehow Bushido or Shinto was associated with militarism and this worship of the emperor and established parliamentary democracy. Is there a sense that that's what happened?
Partly. There was also general decentralization of power within Japan, so that the idea of, at least initially, attempting to break up the Zaibatsu, break up the controls from the top down that existed throughout the strata of Japanese society into something that could more resemble a republic or something that we would be familiar with in modern Western civilization, as opposed to the extreme level of control through all level of civilization at the top, which would make it potentially only a situation where only a few men essentially would decide what would happen with Japan, whether it would be a peace, whether it would be a war, and that was definitely something that we wanted to move them away from.
Well, what kicked off the discussion about the Japanese emperor renouncing divinity was I had brought in Endo's book Silence, which was on the novel on the repression of the Christians by the shogun. And I had read a book on the hidden Christians, where a sect of Christianity persisted in Japan for 300 years, rediscovered when Perry opened up Japan. And by the time it reopened Japan, that form of Christianity was very bizarre indeed. And the point, though, was that during that time, Christianity was demonized. Christians were considered subhuman. If they were caught, they were killed in horrible ways. And I've never read any book or discussion about the mistreatment of Western soldiers, Americans and Britons, the British, because of their Christianity. I always wondered, what would it be like if you've got a culture that has taught for 300 years that Christians are devil worshippers and subhuman, and then you go to war with Christians? Wouldn't your treatment of those people look a lot like the Bataan Death March? Now, admittedly, the Japanese weren't particularly nice to anybody else, but I wonder if that had played a role in Japanese mistreatment of POWs.
I think that there's absolutely something to the religious aspect of the Japanese treatment with POWs. Shinto essentially, this was the island created by the kami. The representative of the kami essentially was the emperor. He was a kami himself, but he was sort of the figurehead for it all. And so I think what a lot of people don't realize is that in a lot of ways, fighting the Japanese in World War II was a lot like the situation in the Middle East, where we have religiously driven hostilities, at least on one side.
There's certainly kamikazes there as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Works about as well for them, it seems. It doesn't tend. It tends to work. Anyway, that's a different topic. I have another question. Coming back around to message fiction, because I've read, as I said, I've read Starship Troopers, and Starship Troopers, or actually Heinlein, is generally fairly unsubtle message fiction. Like, he's got a point of view and he's not shy about sharing it, and he'll quite happily lecture you in his books, but they work. So, does anyone have an example of bad message fiction? Probably that I've heard of, or that you're willing to describe to give me a feel for what it looks like.
Darling, if you were a dinosaur.
All right, fine.
Give a dinosaur a cookie, Milo. Well, really quickly, I just want to make a distinction here, though, because Larry Correa has responded to that same criticism, which is, well, you say that you're against message fic, but you like Heinlein, and Larry's point is, and Sarah Hoyt's, that, well, though Heinlein's fiction contains messages, it is not message fiction because, like I said, there is still a good story there, and the story does come first. So it's okay to have a message in your story, just don't focus on the message to the exclusion of, or to the detriment of the story.
Yeah, the point is the terminology I think would be message driven. If the story
Yes.
is message driven, then you've got a problem.
Yes.
Do you have an example of that?
Let's see if I haven't thrown
What is it
anything out
like?
yet.
What? I mean, like, what does a particularly bad example of that look like?
Golden Compass.
Haven't read it, but that's okay. I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, it started with actually some good ideas, but he flushed it all to just make his point, and killed the story. Killed any interest that people would have in the world, the characters, or what was going on.
Yeah, and as John, whose presence we are sadly deprived of today, has pointed out, it's the problem with Pullman's work isn't just that it's anti-Christian. That's fine. I mean, if you want to do a book where the protagonist dares to do the impossible by overthrowing a tyrannical god, and you follow it through to completion, well, that could be a great story. But the problem with, I think it's Amber Spyglass in particular, is it's internally inconsistent. It breaks the promise made early on, and I don't want to spoil anything as to how, but it does.
I'm probably not gonna read it. So go. No, well, you know, maybe there's others that can. Probably not gonna read it.
So,
Well, God,
Yeah, we want you to
sorry,
read
go
ours.
there's a good example. I'm trying to find who wrote it. A good example of message fiction where I completely disagree with the message. It's Red Mars, Green Mars, and Blue Mars. And it's the multi-generational tale of the colonization terraformation of Mars. And its ideas are strongly anti-market, and that top-down control works, and all of this kind of stuff they disagree with. But the characters and the sweep of the story and the epic and the scale of what is going on and all of these other things are so well done that even though I can look at it and go, okay, there's no way that would work because people wouldn't do things that way, it still works as a story. So I think that's an example of where the message, even though it's one I don't agree with, still didn't swamp the story. And I think that when we're doing something with a message, that is kind of how to aim for it, I think.
agreed.
So two things. Jason, can you send Jaji an invite?
I just did.
Okay. And then the other thing, I think a really good example of of message fiction done well and message fiction done bad actually is in Atlas Shrugged. And then for the vast majority of the book, Atlas Shrugged is, I mean, it's very definitely a message piece, but it's a well-written, sort of like well-crafted message piece. And then you get to the John Galt Speaks chapter that everyone tells you to skip, where she then spends 75 pages telling you what her message was, and all the artistry's gone out the window, all the plot's gone out the window. It's just Ayn Rand lecturing you for 75 pages about the things you just spent 1,000 pages on. So I think for me that's the big difference, is that one of them, like like fiction with a message, is still fun, it's still well crafted, it's still enjoyable, whereas bad message fiction is everything falls apart for the message, everything bows down to that message.
Perhaps the difference there is, does it pass the shut up and sing test?
Yes.
You know, if you get to the point where you're reading Ayn Rand, and I did, and you go, shut up and get on with the story, you know you've got too far.
I think the other thing is we also want to caution ourselves and others who are creating not to try and smother what's important, because things that are important to an author are always going to come up. They're going to surface a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see some of it there. For instance, I can see the love of logic or reason in some of the stories, the grasp for the beyond the theological. What I've gotten both of mine is my focus on the importance of justice. So I think that you don't want to smother that because I
Hello?
think that's part of the creative process.
Oh, hello.
Hello?
Hey, Judgy.
Hey there.
Judgy. It worked. Huzzah.
Yay!
Okay, we're just talking about why message fiction doesn't work, and then arguing about why, but Heinlein's obviously message fiction, and why that's not quite true. Well, not
Well,
true in the appropriate sense.
I can tell you when I was a young girl, I used to have a study hall where I had a free hour in the library at school. And I used to read lots of things during that period, but partially one of the things I read was romances because they were quick and you could put them down and walk away at the end of the period. And I quickly discovered that the Christian romances, even though I agreed with everything, were really boring because they were just message fiction. They weren't about a romance. So message fiction is a fiction with a message. It's fiction that puts the message instead of the story, and it doesn't matter if it's a message you agree with or not.
That's a good point.
As like EJ was saying, message-driven as opposed to
Exactly.
character plot-driven.
Yeah,
Does
I
it
think.
make-
Sorry.
I was going to say, does it make a difference if you agree with the message?
That would be something I'd be curious about too before I upset too many people. What about Elron? What about that message fiction?
I've never read anything by him. I'm such a barbarian.
I know he does a lot of, the organization does a lot of good with the writers of the future, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to be too harsh, but that's some pretty rough stuff.
I can't speak.
Actually, sorry, I was
I
going to
can't-
say the closest I've come to reading L. Ron Hubbard is I saw the John Travolta movie Battlefield Earth.
Well, look, it's like Jerry Lewis. Okay, what he does for those kids is a mitzvah, but his comedy doesn't age so well.
I can't speak for L. Ron Hubbard, but I think The Watchmen is a good example of a piece with a worldview that I don't agree with that I thought was fantastic. So,
Yeah.
or back to Atlas Shrugged. I've grown up a little bit, and I don't agree with everything in Atlas Shrugged. So, but I still think it was well written.
There's too much in Atlas Shrugged to agree with everything in it.
There's an interesting one I've seen that was competently written by a truly gifted author, but didn't really fly with me would be Piers Anthony's Tyrant of Jupiter series, which the problem with it wasn't. Yeah, and it sounds like it had everything I'd like. I mean, but the issue with it, where I think it fails as whether he's doing the message, is there's the presumption that the reader is going to agree with everything that's in there without showing it more, I guess is the way to do it. If you really want to put a message out there, you show why, you show the different viewpoints, you show how it works, how you think it works, because of course none of us sees everything. And where it kind of fell flat in that, while it was overall a great sweep, and I was certainly bought through and read all of it and enjoyed it, but what fell flat was the presumption that what the Tyrant of Jupiter was doing was correct, and that the other side was evil, and it wasn't really. We didn't get the level of depth where if someone was not receptive to that message, where they would have just said, "Oh, okay, now I understand." Maybe not now I agree, but now I understand.
Okay.
Indeed. Well, so we spent some time discussing what a good story is not. Shall we proceed by the via negativa, perhaps, to now discuss what a good story is?
Sounds like fun.
Sure.
That's why we're here. So who wants to go first?
I think definitions will differ, but I think good stories are things that have a moral quality to them, where there's a moral challenge to be overcome. That Pokemon, by the way, is my son Just, who has joined us. It says
Hi.
Pokemon.
Hello.
Hello.
Just,
Hey,
you
Just.
can listen, but only talk a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Just one of you, is it?
I recognize that Pokemon.
That's fine.
I think John used it as his avatar when he was on Geek Gab for this.
Yes, because
Yeah.
he was using Just's account.
Stole my stuff.
Anyway, please continue.
Oh, sorry, Chaji, did you use
Yep.
the link or the invite to get in?
The invite, I think, why?
Okay, Lou's just trying to connect. So,
Hello.
Yeah, I used the invite thing, I think. Well, let me look. The thing that said hashtag Hangouts Air was the one that worked for me. So that was the link. I'm not sure which one's the link.
okay,
That's the one that
fair
worked.
enough. That's all right. I'll invite Lou again. Continue talking. That's fine. I can do this quietly in the background.
Excellent. I'm going to forward this to Lou. Well, what about the rest of you guys? What do you think makes a good?
I think right off the bat, I have like sort of two categories, like things that are well written and things that are science fiction, and it's not one or the other. It's not one or the other. It's it's a Venn diagram.
Oh, okay, good.
So there's an overlap
You
there. There's Hyperion, which is well written in science fiction, and there's the Big Sleep, which is well written but not science fiction, and then there's the Lensman, which not terribly well written but great science fiction.
Yeah, you make a really good point. My dad, who was a writer, used to talk about the fact that a really good writer could make any subject interesting, including subjects he absolutely didn't care about. And he would give me articles that were examples of this, where someone took something like, shoemaking or golf or something that, we had no knowledge of, and made it absolutely fascinating. And when someone does that, it tends to be interesting, even if it's not the subject you like. But for the subject you like, the writing doesn't have to be nearly as good because the subject already has you interested, which is one reason why people tend to like message fiction for their personal message, even when it's not well written. To them, the good writing and the message overlap the same way you just said for science fiction.
Yeah, message fiction gets your juices running because it appeals viscerally to your prejudices that you're already engaged in. Have you ever watched?
One second. Just, is it just?
Just you gotta make sure the chair doesn't squeak.
Just mute your microphone and then it won't come through.
Okay.
When you want to talk, turn it on, and the rest of the time keep it off. Okay?
Okay.
I was wondering why he kept flashing up there. Realized it was the chair. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hey Lou, can we hear you?
Just you gotta make sure the chair doesn't squeak.
Lou, are we able to hear you?
I can hear, but I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you guys.
Soft.
I can turn Lou up a bit, hang on.
Yes.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Yeah, that's better.
Yep, there we go. Hello Lou, how are you? Would you like to introduce yourself to anyone listening? There's one.
Can you hear me?
Hello viewer.
We can.
We
Can
can.
hear you, Lou. Can you hear us?
Hello.
I can hear you all fine.
Huzzah.
Yes.
Welcome. We were discussing what makes a good story. The earlier part that you and I missed, Lou, was on what makes a bad story, and now we've moved on to what makes a good story.
If it doesn't have any retarded typos.
What do y'all think about characters?
Ooh. Now we can sink our teeth into that.
Hello.
Oh, I'm just going to take the ball and run with it. So in terms of characters, I think a story can be good for one of three reasons, one of which is a composite of the others. One, it can be character-driven. It can be plot-driven, or it can be driven by character and plot.
Mm-hmm.
But the vital thing is to make sure that the character's actions are properly motivated to overcome obstacles placed in their path, which creates conflict. So a good plot is, or a good story is driven by the conflicts that emerge when characters attempt to fulfill the objects of their motivations and meet resistance.
That's a good description.
Thank you.
That wasn't me.
Agreed.
Zool?
My dog, and he concurs. Hang on, she's carrying on about something. I'm going to duck out for a sec. I'll be right
Zool
back.
has arrived.
Apparently.
Okay.
That's okay. There's jets going over here, and I was wondering if they were so loud you guys could hear them, because I guess there's like a World War II jet exhibition in D.C., which is only about 20 miles from here, so some of them must have just flown by to the
I don't know. I don't hear anything here in Maryland.
I didn't know if it was making it over the mic, but
No, you're good. So, anyways, run that by me about characters again.
It seems fair, though, that in science fiction, setting can be important.
Sure.
What sells
Ringworld's a book entirely
sells
about
Dune-
a setting.
Yeah, what sells Dune is the world of Arrakis and the culture of the Fremen. I mean, Dune is a book, you read it, and at the end you are thinking that it is not honorable to spill their water on the sand. An experience I had reading Colleen McCullough's First Man in Rome series, where you start getting very interested in the cursus honorium and, you know, becoming the first man in Rome by the end of it, thanks to the 40-page glossary at the end. And you get a good ability in science fiction to, you know, explore cultures and and from a fundamentally different perspective, which in a way is why message fiction maybe do a disservice to science fiction, because rather than challenging people, in which science fiction should do, to look at things from the outside, it takes the inside and makes that the main part of the story.
I think what part of the problem with message fiction is, if I take an idea and I say, I'm going to propose that there's a culture where women are in charge and men are subservient. I think Sherry S. Tipper wrote a book like that I remember. A lot of them have come out, but hers was one of the first ones I read.
It's called the Amazons.
No, that's an old one, but good point. But that's not the book I was thinking of. Anyway, and you approach it reasonably, and you say, okay.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about that book.
You say, okay, I'm going to think about the pro and the con. I'm going to show what's good and I'm going to show what's bad about this idea. That can make good science fiction. But when you take anything and you go, I'm going to show what's good about it, and I'm going to show what's bad about the opposite, and I'm not going to explore it or show fairly from either side, that stops being an exploration of an idea, which is what science fiction is, and starts just being an allegory.
Sure, because it kills drama. Drama is about conflict. It's about trying to have your cake and eat it too and realizing you can't do both. It's how characters and the environment and everyone deals with all of those things. And if you have a situation where one thing is presented as, you know, completely without any critique, then there's no conflict, there's no drama, there's no story.
Right. And you might like the allegory, but if you're someone the allegory doesn't speak to, there's nothing there for you.
Also, I would like to point out, though, that Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory, but it's still a good book, so allegories can be good.
Allegories can be good, but if you don't like the message, usually they lose you. If you do like the message, they can be a lot of fun, but they're kind of two-dimensional. They're like an easy-to-read philosophy book, not like a story.
Hey, can people hear me, by the way?
Yep.
We
Yeah.
can.
Just fine.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good.
Don't judge us.
I'm sorry.
No, Tolkien particularly was against allegories in fiction.
But I just got in the middle of this discussion. You're discussing what you don't like in a story?
No, we just moved on to what we do like.
But we
What you
keep
do
going.
best.
Well, if you have some feedback on what you don't like, that's fine. It's all good. I'm back, by the way.
Welcome back.
When I got on, I had to go off because somehow I was getting multi echo chamber effect, so I couldn't hear everybody at once.
Ooh.
But everything seems to be fine now. I don't know if everybody knows who I am.
That's good.
Go ahead.
That's
There
Lou.
you
He's
are.
very cool.
Introductions,
Oh.
please.
No, I'm Lou Antonelli. I live in East Texas. When you mention an allegory, I think about what happened to my dog's tail in the swamp.
What happened to Dog Service One?
I think he means the alligator gory.
Oh yeah, no, the allegory bit my dog's tail off.
Oh,
It was a very gory
Is
scene.
your dog okay? I mean, apart from
We're
having
talking about what you do like in a story.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's nice if it's entertaining. It's this thing about one of the things that people have said the problem with modern literature is that it's not geared towards entertainment. It's geared towards pleasing the English literature professors in college. You know.
It probably should be geared towards entertaining because it's entertainment.
Exactly. Lou, I think you really summed it up.
Okay, well I'll leave now then. Bye.
That's it. Everyone go home.
Yeah, the reason to tell a story is to tell a story.
Well, you know, in the old days, some of the leading writers, you know, especially in the pulp days, were guys who didn't go to college or didn't go to English, you know, weren't English lit majors, and they were too ignorant to do anything except write entertaining stories that held people's attention. And now you got all these, you know, well-to-do spoiled kids, and they go to college, and they have to, you know, they write these papers, and they kiss the professors' butts, and they churn out this stuff which is literary but unreadable, and then they all end up talking to themselves like, you know, kids who have twin talk, only understand each other's made-up language.
Right. Has any of you heard Neil Stephenson's treatment of Beowulf writers versus Dante writers?
No.
No.
Yes. It's basically what Lou was saying, that you have a story like Beowulf that came about organically through oral tradition and was added to by people telling the story around the campfire. Oh, and add to this part. This is one of my favorite parts. You know, so it's kind of a composite of various folk tales woven together until someone wrote down, you know, the favorite or preferred version of it after it got popular enough. It had been around for years before that. So, you know, no overarching authority or structure dictating, well, write it like this. When you get to Dante, then you're under a patronage system where the poet must write to please his masters. And it's not necessarily worse, but it's not necessarily populist either. So Stevenson talks about running into a writer at a convention who asked him, "What do you do for a living?" You know, not knowing who he was. He's like, "Oh, I'm a writer." Well, she persisted, "Well, I know, but what do you do for a living?" He said, "Well, I am a writer. That's what I do for a living." And she got this sudden look in her eyes, like a lightning bolt went off, and a light bulb overhead, like, oh, you're one of them, aren't you? You're at popular fiction. Because she'd asked him, you know, like, oh, where do you teach? It's like, well, nowhere, I write. And you realized, oh, okay, you're a Dante writer.
She like looked down on him as soon as he realized that he sold to the popular market rather than selling, I don't know, 5 copies or something like that.
Yes, because she is a Dante writer, and he is a Beowulf writer.
You see, I would be like, teach me, sensei. You have achieved what I only dream of.
I'm not worthy.
Well, you know, the thing is, in my case, I you know, being a journalist, I just don't understand the attitude of, you know, writing stuff. You know, a newspaper is totally reader-oriented. You have to write what people are interested in. There's no patron unless it's your publisher, and any publisher who dictates the content of a newspaper is an idiot. So I didn't go to college to get an English literature degree or anything like that. I don't know any better. I guess I'm too ignorant. So I just write, I try to write entertaining stuff that people will actually want to read voluntarily, without being told they have to read because of social pressure.
Bless you.
I population because lots of them aren't. So if you're still working as a journalist in print, you're clearly doing it the right way because
Yeah.
Well, I live in a small, it's a small town. It's kind of out of the way. East Texas is like, there was a professor at Texas A&M University once who asked his philosophy students, if you knew the world was going to end, what would you do? One student said, I'm going to move to East Texas. He said, why? He says, everything happens 20 years later there.
That's funny.
I mean, in the criticism in the wake of the Hugo nominations, if people keep citing Rachel Swirsky's story, if you were a Vasaloraptor, my love, or whatever the hell it was, they say, well, it won the Hugo last year. Well, no, it was nominated. It won the Nebula last year, but people resent the story because it really wasn't science fiction. But one of the things that sticks in people's craws, they can't put the finger on, is that the end of the story is it's a dream, and that's like one of the first things they say you're not supposed to do. But she gets away with doing it because she's a teacher's pet, and she's special and privileged, and she can pull that stunt. But that's one of the first things they say in writing speculative fiction. None of this, oh, and it was all a dream. And
except in Oz.
Yeah, they pull it off in Oz rather well, but that's just the exception. In Oz, I always go away thinking that it really happened, and it just by chance. Alternate universe, two guys looked alike.
The first Total Recall did that pretty well too.
Yeah,
Well, it worked until Dallas. That really jumped the shark at that point.
I think the difference with Total Recall though is that that's part of the story. Like, is it a dream? Is it not a dream?
Right.
Whereas, like, it was all a dream is just a reset button. The reset button's the worst thing that can happen in fiction.
Yeah, I think there are. You're very good point. There are science fiction stories, where the issue of whether something's real or not is what the story's about, and that's a completely different thing than Bobby was in the shower the whole time. You know what I mean? If being in Dreamland has some kind of effect, if you're stuck in Dreamland but bad things can happen there, that's very different than just, okay, we're just going to pretend all that didn't happen.
Right.
Have you? I was going to say, has anyone read, apart from me, and I've probably read it as many times as there are people in this channel, have you read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis?
I actually have.
Yes.
Because that ends with, in a sense, it was all a dream. Sort of, I guess. I don't know.
But I think that makes it strong. We actually, Jess and I and John and Orville went to see it in a theatrical production recently. The Great Divorce.
They do that?
Yeah, they have 3 people playing the parts, and they just switch around who's doing what. It was very elegantly done. And that one, the dream makes it more powerful, because the idea is that you are given the impression that the writer just woke up from a prophetic dream. And the fact that it's a dream means that he was able to bring it back to us and it might be real. So it actually has the exact opposite effect of what it would normally be, because it makes it more real. It makes it more like it might affect our lives.
Okay. Fair enough. That's all right. I was just wondering, because that has that whole, it was just a dream, and it's newer than Alice in Wonderland. And it's apparently not supposed to do it, but it seems to work there. So
I think we're talking about C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce, where he goes and sees heaven and hell, and then he wakes up back in our waking world. And I'm saying that works because it brings it to us. It makes it seem like it could happen rather than like it's some fantasy that doesn't touch on everyday life. So
I think that's not necessarily a dream. I mean, I do think Southwest flies from Texas to New York every day now, so that's possible to do that.
Wait, what?
Which is which? Which is which?
I'll get back to you on that.
I think part of the problem, part of the point about the Rachel Swirsky story, though, is the preferential treatment artists get. It's like, you could get away with this, and the other people can't do that. people kind of skirt over that, but I do think that resentment is an issue. You know, it's like people just have not been treated fair in the way their stories are judged, and you know, certain people can get. I mean, the last time I tried to read something by Rachel Swirsky, I started reading it on screen, and it was so smutty that I had to close the browser. I didn't want somebody to see what was on my screen, and I could be arrested for child pornography if someone saw me reading it. It's just,
Go ahead and finish.
Well, I could never get away with writing something like that myself.
Yeah. What I find interesting is that I was watching on Facebook as people were, you know, responding to the Hugo kerfluffle, as it seems to be called, the Great Kerfluffle, and the people, friends of mine who were on the left who read it, went on and on about how wonderful it was, and the friends on the right don't get it. But I noticed that the exact opposite thing happened to John's story, Parliament of Beasts and Birds. You know, I've seen some really beautiful responses from people who read it on the right, and the people on the left were like, "This is a biblical allegory. I don't get it." And I wondered if there was. They were both kind of short. They were both speaking to some, you know, and you know, John didn't, you know, pick that one out as one he thought was going to be, you know, a favorite. It got picked by people who really liked it, but he keeps saying, wasn't really one of my best works, you know, and I think what he means is that it almost was a little bit more message fiction, but it was a message that really touches those who want to hear that message. And I think that's kind of what's going on with the dinosaur story. Mm-hmm. It has a certain type of writing that touches people who want to hear that message, and everyone else is like, well, huh?
Well, I mean, if you don't have any religious background, how are you supposed to, you know, relate to it? I mean, it's like the story of the journalist Ralph Toledano, who was writing an article for the New York Times, and he was proofing it, and he uppercased heaven and hell, and they sent it back to him and says, "Why are you uppercasing heaven and hell?" And he replied, "Because they're places, you know, like White Plains and Scarsdale." And you know, if you don't believe in it, you don't believe in it. They don't know what you're talking about. You'd be amazed how many people, at least in the United States, you know, don't. The people who don't believe in any religion or they don't know any, they don't associate with the people who do. You know, Chris.
It's the problem with the dinosaur story wasn't that it was poorly written or anything else. It was that it was messaged. The problem was it's not science fiction.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, that was a good point.
I completely agree with that.
But I mean, you know, Rachel Swirsky and the usual suspects like Mary Robinette Kowal and John Scalzi, they can accidentally submit their, you know, use an e-submission and send their grocery shopping list in a magazine. It'll get published and it'll get reviewed, and they'll say such an brilliant existential exposition of the futility of life, you know.
Yeah, but anything, I think it can still be done. And it can still even be very heavily done if it's well written and it touches on something. Like John's favorite work of mine in short fiction is One Bright Star. Yeah, and I think it's something that anyone who remembers being young, who's now grown up and seen the tales and wonder of being young and what the world is now, can identify with it. I think it has that hook potentially on anyone that would read it, whether they agree with the message within it or not.
It's my favorite of everything John wrote too, and I completely agree with you. The little glimpses of the childhood world, and you know, with the kind of against the almost drabness of the adult world, remind us of what we face in life, you know, and also of the fact that maybe there's something more out there as adults that we can pick up again if we remember it.
Or if we want to.
Or to want to, yeah, that's a very, very good point.
Well said.
Yeah, you know, I had an idea floating around in my head, and I totally cannot remember what I was going to say now. It's going to come to me about 3 o'clock in the morning.
What about the $50 you owe me?
It wasn't about that.
Yeah, I was.
I told you, man, next week.
Whenever anybody says they can't remember what they were going to say, I said, you were going to pay me back the $50 you owe me.
Does that work yet?
No, but it's no reason not to try.
What I always remember is the Steve Martin skit where he says people always go, well, it probably wasn't very important, and he responds, oh yes, I remember, I'm radioactive.
I I was reminded when who was it? Who was speaking? They said if any of the usual suspects sent in their grocery list, it would be
With Lou?
That was me.
was it Lou? Sorry, Lou. It would be lauded as this amazing existentialist work of fiction. Does anyone remember the Sokol hoax from the mid-90s?
Yes.
What?
A
Were they invented a
scientist.
painter?
No. He
Okay.
submitted. He wrote. What was his first name? Not important. At any rate, he basically, I think it was a feminist deconstruction of quantum gravity, or
Oh, the
title
Science
was
Journal
something
one.
like that.
Yes.
Yeah, and he sent it, and it was Annie, shush, and it was basically just total gibberish. But all the right sort of wordy gibberish, and he sent it into social text, if I remember correctly, and they published it. It was just like, you people have no standards. This is total rubbish.
Wow.
I saw just recently
What are you
someone
doing?
was doing that. They had taken some sort of a nonsense post with article with sounded good but had fake names like Dracula had written it or something, and they sent it around and found out which of the publications just wrote back, oh yeah, we'll print it for $100, and
Yeah,
which
there's a
ones
real there's
didn't.
a real problem with that. There's a real problem with the way they print anything because you pay to be printed in the journal. But this was before that. This was like, yes, we'd love to run this. You don't have to pay us, but and it was just gibberish.
Well,
I think
and
I think you
Sokol.
need to put the dog online. It's not making more sense than some of the participants today.
Need to get him an avatar.
They're biting each other's faces. They do that.
Sad puppies indeed.
Jason, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
because I was going to point out the closing chapter of that was that Alan Sokol, of course, comes out and says,
Thank you.
"You idiots! It's a joke." And the left immediately turned on him and said, "How dare you do that? You violated the rules.
The rules.
The rules of good faith and not taking advantage of us being idiots."
You know,
Oh,
and
wow.
I was reading that article someone posted on Facebook. The guy who was like, if you're reading a story to your children every night for bed, you should maybe feel a little guilty about, how you're
Oh, Swift.
overprivileging your children.
Oh, right.
And I think one of the biggest differences between those who are of a superversive mindset and those who are of the more social justice subversive mindset is really that it comes down to that sub and the super. As a superversive sort of person, you have a higher thing to aspire to, and you go for equality by adding to things that are lacking. Whereas from the opposite point of view, the subversive sort of like everything sucks, the material world is all there is, you go for equality by leveling the playing field rather than dragging people up. You make sure everyone starts, back where the least capable person is.
Like the Vonnegut story where they put the weights on the dancers to keep them from being
The
able to
Harrison
move
Bird
anymore.
you're on.
Yeah,
Yes.
were gracefully.
Yeah, and
when
I
read that
think
story- oh, sorry.
I think
gonna
it
say-
stems from a sorry.
We need a conch.
Yeah, we do.
Okay,
But I think it
Stevie.
stems from
Wait,
like
Just
Just wait, let Josh talk.
a basic assumption on the part of people who don't have another country that they to use the biblical language, citizens of another country, they don't have something else to look forward to, like something to look up to, and so this is all they have, and they it's just not wired into them in terms of their worldview to assume that you can aspire to something more. So they expect all of us to be nice and not expect those other people to aspire to be something more, because you can't.
I think that's why this really is starting to crash when they attempt this on speculative fiction. Because it's one thing to do that in kind of a literary area where everyone just buys the book to leave it on their coffee table or whatever have you, or talk about how they understand deep things in it that no one else can. But when you're actually talking about something that is imagining the fantastic, or the great heights that mankind may eventually attain within technology, or amazing otherworldly circumstances and characters and all that, and you're operating from a subtractive viewpoint, it's just going to fall flat. It's just,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
how can they create when they can't create?
Right. I've been reviewing Transhuman and Subhuman, and I think what John would say if he were here was what makes a good story is it reminds us we don't belong here. That we are citizens of another country.
Yeah, that's very beautifully put.
Mhm.
Joss,
No,
were you
thank
going
you.
to say something?
Yes. Okay. So I'm not sure about this, but I think Hades is in Texas. So I think I've solved the question.
Yeah, I am in another country. You're right. When the U.S. falls apart, don't knock on my damn door. I will show pictures of you to my dogs, and I do have real puppies, and I'll show them pictures. I say, if you see any of these yard birds, bat them.
Ah.
That's one of those
I
pictures,
love-
the Democrats thought that they were going to do better with the race for governor this year because they had Wendy Davis, and she punched all their right emotional buttons, and then she did worse than some other minor candidates had done in previous years, and they couldn't figure out why because they thought changing demographics with the Hispanic population was going to drive the Democratic vote up, but what they didn't anticipate is because it's not tracked the same way as the in-migration into Texas of all the people who are fleeing other states like California to come here. And if you get you want to talk about it, you want to talk about someone who's fallen off as jackass on the way to Damascus. You see how a Californian votes when he comes to Texas. Well, I'll vote for Governor Abbott, but he's too liberal for me. We need somebody who's really going to kick ass and take names with these left wingers who ruined the country and destroyed my state.
I don't know.
Good point.
Oh,
yeah,
I was going to say, speaking of Texas, after the attack there during the week, well, abortive attack, did anybody see John Ringo's comment on it?
Yes.
I fell off my chair laughing when I read that. It was basically, ISIS jihadis turn up in Texas with AK-47s and 200 rounds of ammunition. 200 rounds of ammunition in Texas. That's what nuns carry to church.
200 rounds. My Labrador has more ammunition.
Right.
The Labrador. That's the Labrador who has pictures of us guys. Watch out.
It's so funny. This guy shows up and he pulls out a gun and he starts shooting in Garland. In Garland. It's like ping, ping, ping. I mean, everybody in the dogs would probably be pulling guns out from under their tails.
Run, it's John's puppy!
Not all of us live in Texas, and Al Qaeda has claimed that.
I'm sorry.
ISIS. No, ISIS has claimed that they've sent operatives into like 15 other states, one of which is mine, which is far more gun retarded than Texas is.
You need to move.
I'm trying.
I just thought that was a really funny comment during the week.
We're just trying to figure out what Texas sees what to do with Austin, but we've pretty much come up with the two-state solution, and we're going to do like they did with Berlin,
Well, what happened with California's plan to break into 6 states that they had at the last election? Are they going forward with that, or was that a momentary blurb that went away?
Well, the problem is with educational standards, they couldn't count up to 6.
I have a great plan. Guys.
What's that,
It's called
Jess?
the one-state solution, where we give all of the Middle East to the Jews.
Oh dear.
Open that can of worms.
I'm sitting here in
don't
Fresno, California, and we've always been very partial to the three-state solution, where we would name the 3 states Northern California, Southern California, and Western Oklahoma. Yeah. So guess where I am, right?
Yeah.
Well, there are plenty of people here who really want to break Chicago off, just let Cook County be its own state. It has nothing to do with anything.
Well, they feel the same way here in Virginia, where our whole state turns red except for 2 jurisdictions at the very edge of D.C., and that makes the entire state go blue. And it's like, well, if they could just push the line at D.C. just a little bit, everybody in Virginia would be voting in a completely different direction, So it's kind of eerie.
people in Texas say they're grateful to Oklahoma because it sucks so bad that's what keeps Texas from sliding into the Gulf of Mexico.
But that's also true of many other states like Illinois and Wisconsin. Illinois and Wisconsin are both primarily Democratic states because of Milwaukee and Chicago.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've heard there's a lot of that in the U.S. where it's like the entire state is deep red, or sort of deep conservative, except for these tiny. Well, the cities are large, but these tiny little points of.
Yeah, it's very true.
Well, that's because the Democratic Party stuffs the ballot box so mercilessly in the inner cities. If it wasn't for that ballot stuffing, the Democrats wouldn't get nearly as many votes as they do. But they've learned to do the razzle-dazzle. There's even a term that's used in legal circles. It's called a racial shield. You can't protest the ballot stuffing because...
That puppy.
What?
Gus! Put the sad puppy away.
You know, every time you say sad puppy, my dogs start barking.
Well,
it's a
that's
coincidence,
right.
because on my headphones they can't hear you, but
But they know. They know.
they know. I'm gonna go and see if I can settle them down a bit. I'll be right back.
But yeah, that's why whenever anyone accuses sad puppies of stuffing the ballot box of the Hugos, I have to laugh because I'm from Illinois. If we didn't invent it, we perfected it, and this is not ballot stuffing.
Yeah.
No one dead is voting for Hugos, as far as I know.
If the Hugos were in Illinois, you'd have Robert Heinlein voting.
And Ed Ray Bradbury.
The dead pets, dead pets.
Pet Cemetery.
Which is why the dogs would be sad, you see. But we're, of course, as everyone seems to forget, we are not sad puppies. We are those protesting puppy-related sadness, which means we are those in favor of happy puppies. So we don't have dead puppies.
It doesn't have quite the same ring to it, though.
No.
We could come up with an acronym.
Someone did write a sad puppies song to Dead Puppies. I don't know if you guys remember Dead Puppies.
Oh, excellent
Song.
Yeah,
And
Dr.
it's an anti-sad puppies song, so it's not on our side. But I actually listened to it like 10 times because while one or two things bothered me in it, I thought it was really funny. But I didn't post it because I thought it was.
Never laugh.
Yeah, I thought it was a little offensive, but I listened to it. It was pretty funny.
Thanks for the recommendation.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I just got an email from someone who used to be a friend of mine, and he actually used to be a collaborator. We actually collaborated on a collection, and I thought y'all might find this interesting. For my part, I can't be involved with people anywhere near your hideous friends Theodore Beale and Brad Torgerson, or your hideous little Gamergate people who do all the equally hideous things. I can't associate with a writer who compares EW to Joseph Goebbels. I don't even know what that means. Just because a bunch of old white guys threw a temper tantrum and broke the Hugos. It shames me to ever been a part of SAS or to have my name on a book with you. There's your nickel's worth of free advice.
I see why you said warmer. Goodness.
Yeah.
It's like when he never even met.
Outrageous.
Because
of course, from our point of view, looking at the difference between, sweet, moderate Brad and cool, calculating, far other side Vox, they don't seem like they're in anything together.
They really don't.
Did you see my comment on Facebook today about how a lot of people are commenting on this stuff through gossip, and they actually have no original sources? And so, there's people who are saying today is the 70th anniversary of the defeat of when Allies defeated Vox Day in Europe,
Well, yes, we know it's taken him some time to rise again, but
that's fine. If they want to play the guilt by association game, I could just as easily say, well, fine, I won't be associated with anyone who doesn't denounce Marion Zimmer Bradley or Delaney.
Just
yeah, or requires hate. I mean, that's what they keep bringing up. We have this one example. They keep bringing up Vox, and look at James May. If anyone's noticed he's kind of the archivist of the Evil Legion of Evil. He's come up with thousands of quotes from hundreds of people on their side. They're even more vile than anything Vox has said.
Yeah, and if you look at Vox, it's really interesting to watch people watch Vox. There was one lady who said, I'd been reading, in some post, I'd been reading him for 10 years and I can't find a single worthy thing about him. And other people look at him and they see immediately. His blog is just a smokescreen. He just picks any fact that he thinks someone's going to have an emotional hissy fit about, and he publishes it, and he never says, I agree with this fact. He just puts it up there. And then he waits to see who realizes he's putting up facts and who responds to the trigger of the emotion, you say. It's actually quite kind of amusing to watch.
Yeah, he's a counter troll.
Yeah, he's the opposite. If you could troll by what you post on your blog, it's like that.
Yeah, Ben.
And he was controlling Ron's brother through the diary. That's how he came back.
You mean
his sister? Ron's sister.
If you guys don't get that, he's referring to the book in the second Harry Potter story that turned out to be Voldemort in disguise that controlled Ron's little sister. She's claiming that Vox Day came back by controlling, people through the book until he rose again. Vox
unspeakable, yeah.
Ben, I kind of interpret this letter I got by email as kind of, if I know the circles that this fellow runs in, I think he may realize that it sounds to me like he's frustrated because he realizes that his side is lost. And that's like kind of trying to, a Parthian volley is firing a shot as he departs, because we've communicated earlier, and I was actually surprised to get the communication.
Yeah, he's at the anger stage of the grieving process. I did a post on this. All these reactions to the Hugos from Mutual Suspects display one of the 5 stages of grieving. You've got Scalzi bargaining, trying to say, you guys can get back in my good graces if you just, denounce these guys. You have, like, N.K. Jemisin raging. They're grieving. They know it's over.
Yeah, well, we need to go to the 6th stage, which is called decomposing.
Or maybe even just moving on.
We have a saying in Texas: nothing improves the communities as much as strategic funerals. I swear, in Texas, he needed killing is a defense.
I've heard that. Someone else said that recently.
I'm sorry, but he needed killing.
The judge goes, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Hey, answer this question for me. I haven't been following science fiction inside game stuff for 20 years. How did science fiction become so incredibly crazy leftist?
I think there was a general movement into the righteous indignation fueled communication culture in general. And it just hit here also.
I think that's a big part of it. Another thing is there's always been this view, and I think all philosophies do this to some extent, that the view that this is the future. So if it's the future, it should be in sci-fi, but we've already talked about how it doesn't always work.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of leftist futures as well as rightist futures, as long as they have a good story.
Okay, I'll be throwing JT out of the chat now.
As long as they have a good story and they have what I was saying earlier, which is they show the bad as well as the good. I mean, when a good writer will show the bad part of the culture they put on as well with the good, and then it becomes interesting. And you can go, okay, I really didn't enjoy that book because I kind of didn't like that guy's take on it, but he did it well. I've seen people have that reaction to Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars books, where it is a little too to the left for them, but there's stuff in it that they liked.
Sure.
That was
a lot of it now is mediocre writing. I just finished off Gunter Louis' The Cause That Failed. Fascinating discussion of the 20s and 30s and 40s and how the communists would repeatedly take over some organization and just ruin it. They would come in, they would work hard, they would stay late, they would take control, and then everybody would wake up and go, geez, this is a communist organization. They'd leave, and they would just leave behind them wrecked organizations. When you look at what's happening in the Science Fiction Writers of America situation, you're seeing something very similar to that. Not communism.
when it's an organization, we can be sad. When it was China, it was a major, massive, terrible tragedy. But it was exactly the same thing. When you look into what happened during the Cultural Revolution in China, one of the women who worked in Los Alamos, worked on the atomic bomb, was so horrified by Hiroshima that she moved to China. She defected from the West. And the Cultural Revolution, they put her on a dairy farm. They never let her near a lab, which is great for the West. But what a weird, strange... And when people in China nowadays, they don't want to talk about it. They just, it's like a madness came over them, and they just woke up one day and they walked away from it.
Well, both of you guys nailed it. I think the subversive leftist philosophy is entryist by nature. It's inherently progressive. So what happened was they took over the publishing houses in the Sefwa. The gatekeepers rigged the system to reflect their worldview.
That has to be the answer. It's the blacklisting that goes on, which happened with the communists during the 20s and 30s in Hollywood in the 40s. But it's just amazing. What I picked up from reading Rui's book was how it's like a virus. It comes in. There's a healthy organization that's doing something. They take over, make it fit their ideology, and the next thing you know, it's now a defective virus. Effective dysfunctional organization, and it's not like you could say that Scalzi is a communist or a member of a party, but he certainly is having the same effect on science fiction that the communists had on organizations in the 30s. Labor unions.
He's an intersectionalist feminist.
I think even beyond that. I think for a while people have had this desire to move science fiction out of the realm of popular fiction and prove that we're worth it, that we're literary. Everyone praises like these literary science fiction authors. I think who was it that wrote Williamson wrote Light. That Neil Gaiman was all like, "This is the best space opera I've ever read," and it was really just kind of literary garbage. It was like 300 pages of people with weird sexual issues, like in a nominally sci-fi setting, but that was literary. And so I think once
to be Dante authors.
Yeah.
I think something else happened too that I only just thought while you were talking, Josh. So this is my first time thinking this thought. If it doesn't work out, I apologize. It occurs to me that at one point things like sexual relations outside the norm was something really unusual. And when, like, let's say someone like Heinlein threw out the ideas of group marriages or something, it was really out there. It was really a science fiction idea. We're living with that stuff so much now in our actual real life that it's not science fiction anymore. And some people,
one woman married for life? That's crazy talk!
It's crazy talk! And we're having to deal with things like there recently was a marriage in Thailand of 3 boys, or it's other strange things, where these ideas to the general public now are not necessarily new science fiction ideas. Not that you couldn't get a new take on them, but they're not as new as they used to be. But there's a certain part of the population to whom they haven't quite caught up yet that these things are now part of our daily life, and they still think they're fighting to introduce them. And I think part of it is the difference between the people who are still trying to present the ideas as if they're new and the people who've realized they're not new, and if you want to make a good science fiction story out of them, you'll have to take a new take on them.
Right, no longer has shock value.
Yeah, that's why they're all falling apart. Like the shock value, they're inherently countercultural. The left is only winning when it's against something, when it's rebelling. They don't know what to do when they're in charge.
Right.
So now,
that's well put.
Thank you. Upholding the motherhood statement, which the common wisdom of sci-fi has been, the purpose of sci-fi is to burn the motherhood statement, to say that it's not about mom and apple pie, and to subvert that. Well, that is now the norm. That's the establishment, and we are the counterculture.
Yeah, but the thing
that's not radical
the thing that's working against them is that the normal people who are still having heterosexual relationships and having offspring are doing so, and so they're having children. Meanwhile, all these bizarre relationships aren't producing children, and what children you get, like Scalzi, are so inbred and neurotic that they're dying off too. So they're kind of creating their own enemies. The problem with Christians is they tend to breed well.
I noticed a while ago that almost all my atheist friends don't have any kids.
Yeah.
And a number of my Christian friends, have more than 6, have 6 or more than 6. And I thought, what's that going to look like in about 20 years?
Well, that's the Toronto effect. James Toronto from the Wall Street Journal points out that how many millions of liberals have been aborted by their parents and are not showing up to vote.
One thing that some leaders, religious leaders in the black community have pointed out is how badly the demographics of the black population in the United States has been affected because of abortion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why. Yeah, because it's one of the reasons why African Americans now are the third ethnic group in the country behind Hispanics because of the effects of abortion. I mean, Klansmen are in favor of abortion for certain people.
How is having black skin an ethnic group?
Well, it's these things go into all different types of groups. Just you are correct that to a certain degree, some people with different skin color fall into a general American group.
I have a less pale skin, so now I am a different ethnic group.
Well,
that makes no sense.
It's true. You can have people who you can have people who are raised in a certain ethnic group who are not of that appearance.
You can't check off nincompoop on the box.
What?
You would have to find the box that says nincompoop, but there's not a nincompoop box to check off.
He's joking, Joss. You could
That's
have
a joke,
for instance,
son.
You could have people of a number of different physical appearances who had the same ethnic background.
Well, I think I told you all the story about, maybe you read it on Facebook, when Halle Berry won the Academy Award for Best Actress, and some local DJs here in East Texas were commenting on she was called the first, African American who won the Academy Award, and some of the local guys were saying, I don't know though, she isn't particularly dark. I mean, I'm not sure she could play a Cajun, and and there's an author who lives in Louisiana, writes crime fiction named Deborah LeBlanc, and she's a Cajun. And I said, and the next time I saw her at a convention where she wasn't looking, I stared at her. I said, shit, she's darker than Halle Berry. So it's just bullshit. It's just bullshit. I get so sick and tired of getting lumped in with they say, oh, you white people are privileged. Yeah, right. My parents, I'm too Italian on both sides. My parents immigrated here after World War II. Why, you try to peg me as white and treat me like I'm privileged. Yeah, I'm really privileged, I'm sorry, my folks didn't own any slaves. They were stealing donkeys in Italy during the 18th.
What I remember is that when I was a kid, Spanish was white. There's a book called How the Irish Became White. Well, it went the other way too. I mean, the Spanish guys were, as they weren't any more different in my neighborhood than the Italians or the Irish or the other groups that were, aware of each other, but they kind of all worked together. And so really, if you look back at the history of New York, I'm more familiar with New York than other places, you see that each group of immigrants came in, everybody hated them, and then 20 years later they kind of assimilated and somebody else came in.
We need to come up with a new designation of rectal American. That'd be more accurate.
Yes, I will check my privileges. Yes, so here's my privilege that if my mom lived in Nazi Germany, I would never be born. Here you go.
And just you have the privilege of being read to at night, which is apparently a new privilege.
Okay, just so
You cannot have that privilege.
the names, the names are in the big letter headings, but then everything else gets blacked out.
That's the NSA that's tapping into our feed.
ISO 9000, ISO 9000.
Yeah, they're welcome to listen.
Is Peter
I'm still
talking to
not
someone
voting
else?
for the third term Obama.
Can't they get into our feed by listening online?
Okay.
That'd be
Thank you.
too
And then
complicated.
interrogatory.
Maybe
We
it's the
can't-
echelon AI.
We can't do publicly something we can do secretly.
You know, I noticed on my
Could be
Facebook
there.
feed
Yeah.
today, I didn't see any of my English literary friends on Facebook. They were obviously spent all night getting drunk after the Conservative Party won the election.
Oh yes, I saw that in England, didn't I? Yeah, the Conservatives romped at home, much to the upset of quite a few people I know.
Well, you know, somebody once said the funny thing about it's the social classes and the way they vote. They said, you know, the English lord votes Labour, and then he lets the butler borrow the Bentley to go vote Tory. You know.
Ben, what's your take? Ben's
Yeah,
not-
Ben's English, aren't you?
Ben, are you there? Maybe
Yeah, I don't live in England anymore. I haven't lived there for 15 years.
Oh, I thought you were still in England. Where are you now?
I'm in the Czech Republic.
Oh, I knew you were in a place that was forward in time from us, and I for some reason thought you were still in England. Well, that's kind of exciting.
You're in the Czech Republic.
Yeah. I married a Czech girl. I speak the language pretty well.
No, wait, it's pronounced chick. You know, like get a load of that chick.
Czech, as in the Czech bounce.
It wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
I think Ben's allowed, and the rest of us are not in that case.
Jason, my impression from interacting with people on Facebook is that everyone in England and Australia, except you, are a bunch of farting socialist leftists. Why?
It's not quite true, but there's some truth to that.
You're the only conservative I've ever seen from Australia, and then when you have the Brits, they're always pro-labor, etc. Where are the Tories? Where are the non-crazy leftists from Australia?
Says the guy from California.
Oh yeah, I'm from West Oklahoma, California. I'm a reasonable Republican from the non-ocean part of California.
I can answer your question. In England and Australia, Australian politics takes after English politics a fair bit, and relative to the US, we're quite our conservatives are basically rhinos, I guess. But there are actually like groups you'd probably recognize. Well, we have like fairly radical libertarian types here as well, but they tend to be much smaller than in the US. But they exist. I mean, we have a local Mises Institute that has conferences and things like that. I know a bunch of them. They exist. They're just actually, I'm friends with a bunch of them on Facebook. But
so when you say
there's
smaller,
not as many of them.
Okay, because you didn't mean like Hobbit-sized. They were libertarians, but they were all short.
If you're standing on the cliffs
Some
of
of them
Dover
are.
looking south, okay, you say, okay, which way am I going to go? If you go left, you go to Australia. If you go right, you go to the U.S., and that explains who went where.
I see.
Because we get all the conservative ones, and you get all the left-wing nutcases.
Yeah, we really do. Well, it was an Australian that put out
Well, I
that
haven't seen this. You had a
shouldn't
prime
read to your
minister who was
kids.
a
That
redhead.
makes
Excuse me, I'd like to make a comment.
What's that, Jess?
Has anyone here played Legend of Zelda?
Yes.
I dated a girl named
Do
Zelda
you
in high school.
remember? Do you remember cuckoos?
Yeah.
Those are basically liberals. They swarm you. Yep.
Son, there's 3 syllables in liberals and 4 in Texas. Liberals, as in I'm going to go shoot me some liberals.
Just no shooting liberals, okay? Your grandmother's a liberal. We have to treat them with kindness.
Well, we have to check to see if they're in season too.
Segue to something. One thing that can turn me off of a book is if I find my positions and who I am stereotyping. For the left, when we're doing, I'm thinking.
We're back on topic. Amazing.
But
sorry, David. Continue.
when writing, we also want to keep that in mind. So it's one thing to present an idea is ideologically unsound, logically inaccurate, to show the consequences of what can happen. But we've all read books where we find our positions or our basically caricatures of ourselves in it from one way or another. I guarantee almost whatever our views, we're going to have seen that. We're not only not swayed by that, but that can kill a story completely when you see
that's
like
one
a
of the
complete caricature of someone.
That's one of the complaints I hear from the right against the dinosaur story.
Exactly.
Is that they found the caricature of that the left believe. What I notice on both sides, because I actually have this magic ability to switch back and forth and think like either side, probably because I used to be a liberal when I was young. I can switch back to thinking that way. And I what's it? John talked me out of it. Yeah, I should write a conversion story like the way John has his religious conversion story about what happened to me. But I do kind of have it online, and what happened to me eventually was I kind of withdrew from politics, and I have some liberal sympathies and some conservative sympathies. But when you switch back and forth, what I notice is that each side demonizes certain qualities about the other side that are the opposite of what they value, but that really have anything to do with the other side whatsoever.
Exactly.
You know, like they think, okay, I have this quality and they don't, so they must be the opposite of me. And the opposite of me is not what they are. They're something else. And so the opposite of me caricatures show up all over the place. And the people who are actually on the other side look at those caricatures and go, I have no idea what this is. It has nothing to do with anything, I think.
Yes, I've noticed that. Well, I don't know if that's true of liberals, but I've certainly noticed that with the caricatures of the right. Well, I mean, we saw that with Sad Puppies. You know, it's
Right.
a bunch of racist white guys hating on diversity in science fiction. It's just like, have you suffered a head injury? I mean,
Have you wounded in the brain?
Have
pretty
you
much.
looked at the slate? If you look at the slate, you can tell that that's not what's going on here, you know? But what really comes down to in that particular case is both guys are pro-diversity. And one group defines diversity as putting diversity above other things, and the other group defines diversity as a diverse collection of ideas.
Well, it's
So
one side is for diversity, and the other side uses the term equivocally.
Yeah.
I think
I would
both
also
sides would
say
say that,
that
though.
one of the most important differences, I really think, and they would disagree, but I believe that one side looks at diversity as trying to be inclusive, and the other side is trying to be exclusive, meaning that those that are the majority should, by the fact that they're the majority populace, they should be excluded. And that's not diversity. That's segregation.
I think you're right about that.
Has anyone seen David Gerald talking about this? It's like, well, we need to reaffirm our commitment to inclusiveness as a community, but then we need to exclude these people because every community has a right to defend itself against outside attack. Like, I don't know, I paid my $40 like you did.
I know South Africans who say don't take any steps towards deliberately excluding people because that's what happened there, and it turns out badly.
Right. Yeah, well, these social justice warriors have given me ideas what to do if I have half a chance.
Social justice whiners. I do not think that social
You
justice
hear why they call
warriors
them-
are fair.
You know why they call social justice warriors? Because the acronym for perpetually outraged snobs has been taken.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked this before, but I don't like the term social justice warrior because A, social justice warrior sounds cool, and B, there are people who are actually warring for things that actually need to be done.
Yeah,
so I think social justice whiner or John Ringo's social justice bully is better because it also helps make it clear, and I think this is very important, that a lot of people on the left are not in this group, particularly older
I think the
people on the left.
social part of the social justice is
Especially with the warrior commentation.
Right.
It's such an insult to our the people who serve us.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. They're real warriors who are out there doing real noble things. And there are people who are concerned about social justice issues who are out there attacking where it really needs to be, like, you know, in some country where women are being treated badly or something, and not attacking where it doesn't need to be. Like, I always think of that joke about, you know, what are you doing? I'm looking for my quarter. Did you lose it here? No, but the light was better. It's like they attack where it's easy rather than where they're needed. You know, you don't see them out there defending the women who and them being mistreated in Muslim countries.
Because it's about an
Well,
unwarranted moral
they hate
superiority.
everything about their own country. Like America, they just don't.
Right.
You know, they just don't like their own country. You know, you've heard the Kessel test for success in science fiction based on the writing of John Kessel. You know, do you hate
Okay,
God?
I'm gonna say I don't know who John Kessel is. I'm sorry.
So go ahead and tell us the test.
Well, it has 3 questions. Do you hate God? Do you hate yourself? Do you hate the United States? If you get 1, you get a Hugo nomination. 2, you win a Hugo. 3, you're up for a Nebula.
What I'm saying is I think there's a lot of people on the left side who are sincere and would like to see real problems solved, and that there's a small group of people who are very loud who are the kind of rushing around and attacking people. The people who are attacking folks like Josh Whedon and Neil Gaiman, those aren't the average left guys. Those are guys who are spending their time bullying people.
You know a better way to get a Hugo Award? A Hugo Award? Writing a good book.
Well said, Sad Puppy.
In theory.
We're trying to make that true. It used to be
Working
true.
on it. I was going to say on that the left and well, circular firing squads, I suppose. I quite like the YouTube video guy Sargon of Akkad. I don't agree with him on everything. He's like he doesn't really like Christians very much. So be it. But he doesn't really like feminists, and he hates social justice warriors, and he's endlessly entertaining. I love his This Week in Stupid segment. But
wait, who?
Sargon of Akkad.
We'll have to look him up.
It comes with some language warning.
He's pretty sweary. He's not really for your kids, but
have Dad check it out for you before you listen to it.
he's that English sort of sweary, so it's sort of I don't know, more natural. I don't know what that is. English comedians and American comedians, the English comedians swear a lot more, but the American comedian swearing always bothers me more because it sounds really forced. Whereas I don't know if anyone's ever watched Jimmy Carr.
Yes.
Swears a lot, but you sort of don't notice it as much. But like American comedians, like I don't know, I've given up on watching a lot of them because the swearing's really gratuitous in a way. English swearing just is really natural. I don't know. Anyway,
But
he's English.
But isn't that really kind of a sad comment?
In American, it's a swear word. In English, it's an adverb.
Yeah, probably it. Anyway, but his observation, because he's just like, he wants to be sort of typical Labour voter type in the UK, I mean, he's just like a typical sort of relatively moderate liberal, and he's observed that, yeah, there seems to be 2 poles in that sort of left-wing side of things, where you've got relatively sensible, relatively centrist liberals like himself, or that sort of group, where they disagree with the right, but they just sort of, they can talk to each other even though they disagree. They can have a civil argument, and then you've got the frothing lunatic brigade, who are perpetually aggrieved. You just can't talk to them. They talk in all these buzzwords, and they're all just insane, and they will viciously attack people that nominally might sort of see their point on some things.
Well, Patton Oswalt.
I remember seeing something called, under the title, "This is why we can't have nice things anymore," as I was researching the savaging of Joss Whedon for... I'm still opaque as to why they savaged Joss Whedon, but...
Oh, I know the answer.
I haven't seen the movie yet, so be careful answering this.
Okay, no.
Oh, you should. It's excellent.
I'm planning to. I just was away.
This will have a very slight spoiler. Apparently, I heard it first. It was they were upset at Joss Whedon because they made... Spooky, stop that. They made Black Widow a damsel in distress at one point, and the feminists got all upset, and you're not allowed to do that. But apparently,
no.
but apparently the reason
Again,
is there's a scene in the movie where Black Widow's talking about how she became who she is, and she's sort of having a
Actually, have that
relationship with
scene
someone, but it
described to
can't.
me, so you can actually talk about that one scene.
Okay, it can't go anywhere, but because one of the steps in her training, the last step in her training is she gets sterilized. She can never have kids.
Right, and she laments that, and
and
people go
she's
nuts.
lamenting. Yeah, she's like, I've lost this. I can never have this, and she seems saddened by this, understandably. But yeah, that's apparently what drove them around the twist.
What bothers me about that is that feminism has become now a movement that says women shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Everything should be masculine or it's not okay. I mean, if women are going to have equal rights, that means that moms should be treated with honor, not that moms should cease to exist or that nobody should want to be one.
But it's the wrong kind of woman.
In a side note, that whole sterilization problem could be solved pretty easily with basically any prophet in the Bible.
Or the super tech that exists in many superhero stories.
Yes, that will also work.
It was just, but that's what really upset them. Like, she was, and I actually thought that was a really, like, I was quite moved by that scene.
It
really
sounds
sad.
like a really lovely scene, and I'll tell you, let's get back to the original subject.
Yeah.
We were talking about character, and one of the things I almost said when we were talking about character is that what really makes a character come to life is when they can do something against type and they still seem in character. If you have a tough girl, when she has a moment of softness or a moment of longing, and you can still see it's her, that makes her three-dimensional. That's good writing.
It makes her fully human, the same way that Banner's reticence and self-doubts make him the human being that he is, and all of the other characters. They have things that they're dealing with.
Exactly, and in order to make a character three-dimensional, what you do is you have them act a certain way, and you have there be an undercurrent of a different quality. Well, I mean, that just sounds like excellent writing, and it's not an attack. It doesn't make her less anything.
You meant the Hulk, right? Because I thought you meant Bruce Wayne
just so.
for a second.
I was also talking about him.
I don't know why.
But yeah, the point was that the article I was reading was, it was very left. It was very reasoned. It was like, we now have all of these strong female characters. We have all of these things, and these. What exactly are these people doing tearing this down? It was exasperated. Like what you were talking about, the conflict with Sargon was having. It was like, what?
Well, that's what I was saying about the difference between the left and the whining group. Because I've been noticing a lot of my friends on the left looking around and going, what they're saying isn't what I want. It isn't what I stand for. It isn't what I think is supposed to happen. Even John, who for a long time was just attacking the left nonstop, despite my saying, they really are human beings out there, just recently realized, he said that, a lot of the left are live and let live, and that's the exact opposite of the group that he calls the Morlocks.
That's true.
It's like, I'm old enough to remember when the busybodies were trying to shut down things from, we're worried that this fantasy is gonna rot your brain and all this from the 80s, and I think that it's just morphed over to a different ground, no less fertile, now, and it shifted over in the 90s and is now in a different ground. But I sense the similar kind of schoolmarm. You're not allowed to have fun without our approval, and I'm appalled at that from any direction.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, with the sort of infestation of this lot in science fiction and gaming as well, it turns out. What do you think the end game is? I mean, where do they expect this to end? there's clearly no satisfying them, and someone even like a fairly aggressive right-wing hating atheist feminist like Joss Whedon gets savaged by these people because he wrote a character having a touching moment.
It ends in a yawning abyss. It ends in just.
It is a desire for righteous indignation in and of itself, and it ends by devouring itself.
Or they
there are people.
All destruction of all human life.
Actually, sorry, I think I've asked the wrong question. I think my question is, what do they think's going to be the result of all this? I mean,
I don't think.
Okay, fair enough. That's a good answer.
They feel.
Well,
they
I have an answer, but it's not exactly to the answer of your question.
Go on.
But there's a book that I really love called Wander in the Spirit Land, and this book was written in 1896, and it's supposed to be a channeled story. The main character it's supposed to be a true story told by a dead man through a medium. It doesn't really matter to me if it's true or not. I really like it. And the general plot is that this was a really evil guy, and he died, and a young woman prayed for him, and because of that, he's kind of been given a second chance. And in one part of the book, he goes to hell, because in that particular background, you could rescue people who were in hell. If they'd been there long enough and they were waking up, you could drag them back to purgatory, basically. And he meets an ancestor of his who he admired tremendously. And he was a Spanish guy, I believe. And the ancestor says, I was with you in all your best moments. And after he talks to him, he realizes that this guy was with him whenever he was prideful. And the ancestor tries to convince Francesco, the name of the main character, to stay in hell and help him. And he says, and I'm going to quote from the book now, again I saw the power in intellect and in literature which I could control and influence through the imagination of descriptive facilities of mortals, living people, who under my prompting would write such books as appealed to the reason, the intellect, and the sensual passions of mankind under the false glamour thrown over them, until the false glamour thrown over them should cause men to view with indulgence and even approve of the most revolting ideas and the most abominable teachings. And whenever I hear these things, I think, that's Francesco's ancestor at work, because that was written over 100 years ago. And it's exactly what we're seeing, is that what they want is that takes, and I remember doing this years ago, taking some idea and thinking, oh, you know, they're just, you know, repressed if they don't know this thing, and trying to make some horrible thing sound appealing.
Well, I think one of the things that's emboldened the social left in the United States is, you know, the fact that the political left is doing well. I mean, we do have Obama as president, so they kind of think like it's like the bratty little kid who said. Who he says, my big brother's going to beat you up, and in this case, you know, it is Big Brother. The government is the one that they're emboldened by it. I think if the Republican administration is elected in 2016, it may, you know, curb their horns a bit. I think what's more likely to be is something's going to happen in the wider social context that's going to appall people so badly that there'll be kind of a revulsion. For instance, there's a ticking time bomb out there. And sooner or later it's going to happen where someone is going to get off a child molestation charge because some state had adopted a gay rights law that's going to trump it. Or there's going to be someone who sues a church and the judge is going to award them like an entire religious denomination's assets as reparations. And once that happens, there's going to be a popular revulsion. And people are, you know, Christians are pretty easygoing, so they've been letting the left, you know, kind of chug along.
Yeah.
When something really ridiculous like that happens, you know, like somebody prays, you know, somebody prays to God, and a judge awards them all the Catholic Church's assets because the Catholic Church is an obvious business fraud. Then, you know, something's going to happen. The thing that's out there that's really going to be dangerous is that there are states where if you actually stop and look, the gay rights laws are so broadly drawn that somebody is going to get off a child abuse or molestation charge because they're gay. And when that happens, all of a sudden everybody realizes how just ridiculous this has become, and there's just going to be one of those moments where everybody kind of looks at each other and goes, okay, that's enough of that.
Well, you're seeing
I was thinking that about Sorry, I was thinking that about the Boy Scouts and everyone jumping up and down, and then the Boy Scouts giving in. Yeah, what do they think is going to happen? What do they think is going to happen when? Because not all homosexual men are child predators. You know, like that's just true. It's not the case, but there are some. Just as there are some heterosexual ones, they do exist, and this is the sort of thing that is going to. This is where they're going to be looking for victims, and this is going to give them access.
The Boy Scouts actually did not, in America anyway, they did not cave on the adult issue. They only said that they weren't going to police the boys. They didn't change their standing on the adults.
Basically, don't ask, don't tell.
No, I mean the boys they said it didn't matter, but
yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like
right, but with the adults they said no, and one of the problems they have is that they're really in the middle of a huge firestorm because on one side they have all sorts of advertisers saying, oh, you know, if you don't change this, we won't support you, and not advertisers, but people give money. On the other hand, they have the LDS Church, which uses the Boy Scouts as their youth program, who says, you know, if you change this, we won't stay with you. So, you know, there's no easy way out for them. So they chose what I thought was not a bad solution because, and I should say, full disclosure here, I am an assistant scoutmaster, so this is very near and dear to my heart.
I'm a
and just as a scout, but I thought, you know, a boy has not necessarily. He may go one way and then he may change his mind as he's, you know, going through his growing stages. So to exclude boys on such an issue, I can see how they would not want to do that. But it's a difficult thing because the argument on the other side goes, well, what if we have a boy and he's got a lesbian mom and she's his only caretaker? Why shouldn't she be allowed to participate? So I mean, you kind of can see they're really in a tough position, you know. But so far, they held strong on the adult issue.
Yeah, two things. If you're a judge in California, you cannot be associated with the discriminatory, repressive Boy Scout institution. And number two is, what a disaster if they had changed that. People overlook that the Catholic Church child molestation scandal involved 80% boys. And of those boys, something like 70% were between the ages of 14 and 18. So it wasn't a pedophilia scandal at all. It was exactly what Jason was describing, opportunism.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, have you ever pointed that out to people about the Catholic Church? It wasn't that they've got a problem with priests. It's that they turned a blind eye to homosexual priests, and it's become a problem. It's like they shouldn't have done that.
I used to go hammers and tongs with the gays on Unbelievable on that issue, and they were quite happy to say Catholics are perverts and pedo apologists and whatever. But when I would cite the statistics, then suddenly the metaphor would change, and I was a homophobe.
You know, it's funny about homophobes. It puzzles me why people understand that you can disapprove of pie or divorce or smoking, but they don't seem to have a category for I disapprove of homosexuality as opposed to I hate it.
You are
pie personally.
You are afraid of pie. That's why you don't eat pie. You are
I could be a pie.
There's
just
a
quieter, sweetie. You can't shout.
Difference between tolerance and approval. We live in an information age where people move and flow quickly, and so a degree of tolerance is going to be essential for smooth functioning society. However, you can't generalize that to assuming that you have to force people to approval for the very same reasons, that you're going to have very wide, differing opinions, ideas, ecclesiastical understandings, and things of that nature. So the very same thing that would require tolerance in a society such as ours also means you cannot impel people to approval.
Right. And I'm also reminded of John's puzzlement when he says, I say all these things you disapprove of. What makes you think that if I hated them, I wouldn't just tell you?
Well, you know, one
Yeah.
thing you have to remember
It's a
is
bit
that
like
when
that,
people
isn't
start arguing with you, it doesn't mean they agree with you. It just means they've given up on you. You know, a lot of people in the United States are just sitting here. They're not saying anything about what they disapprove because, one, they know it's futile, and two, it's obvious that the cultural elites endorse these things, so they don't want to get in trouble. But, you know, you asked about what the end game is. You know, there is an obvious end game, and it's starting to come to the fore. And it's kind of like the left is not going to like it, but they're the ones that provoked it. And that's simply going to be the adoption of a constitutional amendment to make the United States an explicitly Christian country.
What?
Or the other way. I mean, that's the problem with these things. One of the problems I see is that none of us actually know how many people are in any one given camp. In fact, the last 20 years of elections suggest that everybody's really close. You keep switching back and forth, and each president who loses only by a little bit. It seems to be pretty close, and but that may change if the vocal left moves farther left and loses part of its trailing group, which I see happening to a certain degree.
Well, yeah, like a lot of people have said, if Hillary Clinton's elected president and she finally comes out of the broom closet, you know, will that make enough people realize what's going on?
Well,
Lies
one
out,
of
yeah.
the main reason that tolerance alone isn't enough, that you must participate and celebrate, is the same reason that the Inquisition sought out dissent from Orthodoxy back in the Middle Ages when the secular and ecclesial orders were more conjoined, which is that a threat to the ecclesial order is a threat to the social order. And leftism is inherently a Christian heresy. It just replaces original sin with privilege, and so it's about power. It's about trying to assert this heretical alternative social order and force the old order of religious institutions to play ball by the force and power of the state.
It's funny
I have
that.
a question. Why are we supposed to be talking about characters?
It's a good question, Justin. It's a good question.
Fair enough.
Oh, who disappeared?
We did lose somebody. Was it Josh? Josh. Maybe he'll be back.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to pull off eventually. But actually,
you know,
this
I'd
this
like to
does
move
go
on too, because being a
characters well.
hardworking conservative, I do actually have work to do. You know, I don't. Living
I
off
would
government entitlements and voting for Obama is not a job in Texas.
I would say this, that this is a good way to transit this into characters, and that is be able, especially in science fiction and fantasy, where we write about the different, the alien, the strange, be able to understand the character from the character's point of view. I think this is really even crucial when you're also writing villains, that you think about why they're doing what they're doing, why what they think makes sense from their standpoint.
You
Why?
gotta explain why the villain thinks he's a good guy.
Right.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I mean, a good author
Hey, Jason.
has, let's say, conservative and liberal, or any other group you want, will have characters who fall into those groups, and each group will be pleased with I mean, in other words, a liberal will look at the story and go, yeah, that is what I think like. And then a conservative will look at the character who's like him and go, yeah, that is what I think like. And that's what a good author does. A good author does not caricature either side. They show the strengths and the weaknesses of each individual character and their ideas and make them accurate. And they may have an overall point they're getting to, but they don't do it cheaply. Because it's cheaply if you turn one of the characters into a straw man.
You know, I think that's one of the strengths of Joss Whedon is that, you know, for a dude who's anti-religion and you know, pretty far left, I mean, Shepherd Book, as a theologian, he's, you know, I love Shepherd Book. I think he's a great character and a great portrayal of like good faith, you know.
I think Butcher's that way also. I have heard comments about what Butcher's religious and political views might be, but I couldn't tell from the book, from the Harry Dresden books. I mean, he just does a great job. His angels are one of the very few angels who aren't shown to be idiots. And he does his Catholic priest really well, and he does his crazy French characters really well, and he does, I mean, everybody who comes along, he just treats them straight. And I think that's one reason why the Harry Dresden books are so popular, because they're enjoyable, they're a good story, and he doesn't, hit you in the face with anything.
It's about having the ring of truth, isn't it?
Yes.
And one other thing I'd just like to throw in before I need to go is, one thing I really appreciate in the story is ingenious solutions to problems. That
Yeah.
have a hand waving appears and Deus Ex Machina, but they really do have thinking that's gone into resolving the difficult issue. That is a real problem that has to be really faced and really dealt with. The kind of things we really have to deal with in our lives. That it's not just easy to define it away, or a convenient helper comes along who solves everything for us, but there's a real cost to the solutions as well as a benefit to them.
I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I was under the impression that's what was so good about The Martian, was that it was just really good, kind of straight nuts and bolts solving of problems.
Yeah, The Martian versus the environment of Mars is really very simple story, yet amazing. And it almost kind of took the literary world kind of by storm. People were surprised to see it on as high up there, because it was just this. It's old school classic sci-fi brought back to life, and it kind of just
shows you what can be done.
Yeah.
It's like it's been said about setting. It's a good example of setting being central to a science fiction story, because in a genre where you have world building like fantasy and sci-fi, one of your jobs as the writer is to build this room. Okay, James May said it's like building a room. You've got your four walls, floors, and ceiling, and a character's trapped in there, and now you've got to figure out how to get him out of there using only what is in the room. Nothing from outside the room can intrude.
And you have to make the room full of things that the reader doesn't necessarily know ahead of time, but can comprehend clearly enough that they can follow what happens during the story.
Right.
Yeah, like you have it. I like to call it tactical poetry. That you have a brilliant solution that comes together in a way that really inspires you and makes you appreciate the thought processes that have gone into it. Like also in your battles, you'll have the upper hand being lost and regained in believable ways that depend on the actual mechanics of the universe rather than just the convenience of what needs to happen.
Exactly.
Oh, by the way, side note, I noticed that a human can survive the environment of Mars, but Martian can't survive the environment of Earth.
That's right. We sneeze on them, they're gone.
Unless they're the Martians from Last and First Men.
There's too much oxygen on Earth for life to survive. How gross if it is.
John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, who I believe is like everything Superman can do plus some. So yeah, I mean it depends on your Martian, but in the sneezable Martian.
Fire.
Yeah, except for fire. You're right.
The Superman plus Professor X, I've heard said.
Yeah, yeah. But if you're talking about the H.G. Wells Martians, then yeah, we can go there and they can't come here.
Yeah. Well, they're not even characters. They're just plot devices.
Yeah. Well, actually, the Martian Manhunter is Superman plus Professor X plus, I don't know, some other comic book shape changer girl.
I don't know. I don't like DC comics.
Shape changer, you're right. But with vulnerability fire. All right, we probably need to.
I was going to say we should probably wrap this up.
Yeah, we probably need to wrap up
make
dinner.
Ending comments.
Thank you, Jess. And thank you for being quiet most of the time and listening well, Jess. I appreciate that. And thank you for having us, Jason. It was really wonderful.
Thank you for hosting the meeting.
It's fun to do. No one listened this time, but that's okay. It was fun.
We kind of wandered everywhere, but yeah.
I didn't post it ahead of time this time like I did last time, but I'll post it afterwards. I'm sure somebody will go find it.
Can you get Jason, can you get a link? Can you get a link address like a week ahead of time?
I think I can. I need to work this out better. I need to figure out how to turn the chat on too. So.
Because that might help. I mean, as far as being able to announce it.
Yeah, I mean, if we had a link that we could put on our websites with a time that people could link on, then that would make it so they could listen in. Last time I put it on Facebook while we were doing it, and this time I came rushing in from being late, and I didn't think to do that. So.
No, that's okay. Yes. Anyway, thank you everyone for participating. I'm just going to stop broadcasting, and then we can chat for a minute.
You're welcome.
And we'll do this again sometime. All right. I'm going to stop there.